So specifically for if anyone who's new to Watermark or hasn't heard of Watermark before, we really work in 5 different unique areas of technology. Specifically for today's discussion, we're mostly going to be talking about assessment and accreditation planning. However, we also have solutions for e-portfolios and assessment for more granular student and cohort level analysis. Also faculty activity reporting with promotion and tenure options. A little less related to the faculty, but nonetheless important, curriculum and catalog management tools. And then course evaluation and institutional general surveys. So Watermark's suite of solutions uses these various data collection points, putting them together to give you a better insight into what's going on campus for all your stakeholders, both internal and external, and ultimately using this data to drive decisions to help improve student experience and student learning. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Glenn Phillips from Howard University, and I'll actually let Glenn more formally introduce himself.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I have this picture of me in the woods at my parents' house, which is not as cool as Garrett's picture near some cool library, but I'm working on it. My name is Glenn Phillips. I am the Director of Assessment at Howard University in DC. I am currently in Austin, Texas, because with the wave of the pandemic, Howard was shut down, still ongoing as an institution, but shut down physically. And so I ran back to Texas where the weather is warmer, the margaritas are more plentiful, and the queso is always being served. So I am coming to you from Austin. One of the reasons I'm excited about talking specifically about this subject today is that I've been an assessment professional for about 7 years now, and I've jumped from platform to platform. And one of the things that I recognize as we adopt a new platform is that we're not just adopting a new platform, we're adopting a new way of doing assessment that is often guided by that platform. And so as you're using your different assessments, and this can be, or your different platforms, and this can be something like your LMS, this can be an assessment gathering process, this can be something as simple as course evaluations. There are decisions that you're making, but they are within the confines of that platform, which means that that platform is driving how you're allowed to make those decisions. And I want to investigate that, and not to make Garrett too mad at me, but there's also some ways that I want to critique that. And so I was really happy that Watermark partnered with me to be able to kind of give a voice to this, even if some of that is a critique. So we're going to jump in a little bit, and I wouldn't be a very good assessment professional if I didn't have student outcomes or session outcomes. So the outcomes for this meeting are to identify the ways that assessment technology is teaching assessment practices, investigate one of those platforms in particular, which is Planning and Self-Study by Watermark, and then reflect on lessons that other platforms are teaching us. What I am hoping, and what I hope of every presentation that I give at a conference, is that I will speak for a little bit, and then the rest of the time will be an opportunity for us to actually engage and think about how some of these things affect you individually, and how you've seen some of these things play out at your own institutions and with the platforms that you work with. So these are some of our teachers. Many institutions will have assessment platforms. Some of them will have accreditation platforms as well. Learning management systems like Blackboard or Canvas are pretty ubiquitous, especially in these pandemic days. And course evaluation systems. When I started off at Howard, we did not have a formal course evaluation system. It was mainly being done by Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. We gathered that together under a course evaluation system and learned some lessons from that as well. Often, also, there are rubrical grading systems, strategic planning platforms, and even faculty credentialing platforms like digital measures offered by Watermark. And the reason why I call these platforms our teachers is because they are often designed with best practices in mind. Best practices is, I always tell my faculty, it's a very dangerous term, because best practices implies that the biases with which we come to those practices are not being investigated in a thorough way. And so I like to talk about good practices. We can say that there are good practices and bad practices. Best practices assumes that all institutions are a monolith, or that they all have the same needs or the same context or the same students or the same resources. And I find that to be categorically untrue. So when we talk about good practices, those good practices often inform the way that these platforms are created. So for example, in the world of course evaluation, a good practice is to allow department chairs to ask their own questions, or even faculty members to ask their own questions. And so Evaluation Kit by Watermark has that built in. But there are also ways in which they can't see what other people have added onto Evaluation Kit, because it's not necessarily good practice to come to consensus on what those questions are and how the questions impact one another up the ladder. And so we've even put in a feature request for that to be able to be a more synergistic approach to adding questions to the course evaluation. So that's just one example of how good practices can inform platform design. So what I'd like to talk about now, and I guess we'll get into each one of these as we go through the system, but as we are learning from our teachers, we are getting these lessons. And some of these lessons can be educational in really positive ways, and some of them are educational in really negative ways that might actually curtail the way that we could be doing assessment if we weren't bound by these different ideas. So for example, some of the lessons that we learned from our platforms are who needs an assessment plan, who should have access to these plans, what an appropriate cycle is, what the difference is between program reviews and annual reports, appropriate targets, measures, who should be in charge of these things, and then eventually what are we done with the data, and then how can we map that data. So I'm going to show you some screenshots of planning and self-study, and through these screenshots, I'm just going to have kind of an open, strange conversation with myself. But what my hope is that you will use the chat to ask any questions or engage, or I think that we can have up to 9 people presenting. There's 7 of you that I see watching and 6 open spots. So with, if you are courageous and you have the ability, jump on in and feel free to join the conversation in that way. So planning and self-study, this is kind of a base screen. I understand that this is quite difficult to see, and the intent is not for you to read this in detail, but it is to give you an idea of what the hierarchy in the platform looks like. So most of these platforms have a hierarchy that it's built top down. So you have an academic leader, which is usually the provost, and then deans underneath that leader, and then department chairs underneath that dean, and then faculty underneath those department chairs. And everything has viewing access from the top down. And so it tells you from the very beginning that all assessment should be hierarchical, and that those who are in power above you should have power over your assessment, not only to view, but to edit and change. I don't think that it's wise to change that because we like having access to things, but I think it's wise to critique that a little bit and think about the ways in which how we're setting up our platforms speaks to who has authority over assessment and who has the right to edit those things. When I first started at Howard, we used an earlier platform that was part of the Watermark solution set. It was called TaskStream AMS. And part of that was that you would assign people different roles, and these people could view, these people could edit, things like that. And I had a faculty member come up to me, and they were also a program director. And they said, is my department chair going to be able to change what I write? It was a really interesting question to me because I'd never thought about that before. That one, there would be a concern from a program director that a department chair would change something, but also that it was incumbent upon me in some way to give that authority, whether or not they could. And so they did have access to change things, and they kind of went through a process of what that review system looks like. But there is a default assumption that department chairs, deans, and the provost should have authority over the final report of assessment. And from the ground level, I also serve as a faculty member at Howard. That isn't always true. Sometimes the way that the department chair may want to represent my assessment is slightly different from the way that I want to represent my assessment. And part of that is having that conversation about who gets the authority to make those decisions. This second slide is if you actually go into one of the assessment plans, you'll see that there is a learning outcome with measures. The organization of assessment within planning and self-study is actually quite user-friendly. User-friendly is an incredibly dangerous term if you are ever introducing a new platform to faculty. Faculty hate it when people use the word user-friendly, because user-friendly often means user-friendly to whoever's trying to sell it to you. So I will say that planning and self-study has proven to be more user-friendly than many of the other platforms that I've engaged with, but it obviously takes some time to navigate. And part of what you're telling faculty whenever you see different things is what matters and what they should be concerned about. Here, the learning outcomes are always prioritized, and then those measures are stacked under the learning outcomes. It doesn't always allow for those kind of measures that might stretch across multiple outcomes. And so it's actually teaching you that you need to break those measures up in granular ways that you can answer to each outcome, which I'm using this as an example because some of the things that it teaches you are actually a pretty good thing. It is wise to have granular measures. It is wise to be able to break it up across the learning outcomes. If you click into one of these measures, you'll see that it gives you opportunities to choose what kind of methods you're using. And there are direct and indirect measures that they use or methods that they use, but it is a static set of options. And I use this as an example, not as a critique necessarily of the system itself, but recognizing that good practices, often called best practices at places, good practices suggest that there are certain things that you should be using as assessment and certain things that you should not be using as assessment. And so I think it's interesting to look at your platform, whatever platform you're using or whatever platform you're planning to use, and think about what does it value as assessment and how does that align with what you value as assessment. At Howard, we're trying to move the needle a little bit on understanding how inclusive we can be of different assessment practices. And one of those is being more inclusive of the human story and the human experience and talking about student narratives and what they experienced going through a process instead of how did you do on this test or fill out this indirect measure in the form of a survey, but really having a conversation with them. And obviously all of these have an other that you can choose, and that's certainly an option, but changing the narrative around assessment will eventually change the narrative for those who are making decisions and creating these platforms. And so I want to take this brief moment at slide 13 to encourage everyone who's on this call to think about the ways in which you can advocate for what you think good assessment would be and good preparation would be, and what these platforms should look like, because at the end of the day, they will eventually sway to the will of the masses. And if enough people believe that what you think is valuable, the assessment platforms will adjust accordingly. And I will say that is on some level what planning and self-study has become. I have had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people at Watermark, including some of the people who are in product design. And what they did was look at a lot of their products that are within Watermark and what some of the products outside of Watermark are doing and tried to create kind of this beautiful user-friendly Frankenstein that took and adapted all the good things about all of their suite and put them together into one platform that could serve multiple needs. So one of the changes, one of the other things that we learn is that sometimes teachers change. So what you taught last semester or the semester before may be different than what you're teaching this semester because things have changed or new research has come out, or you looked at your course evaluations and realized that students weren't getting this thing or they weren't understanding this thing. And so I wanted to point out that these platforms are often adaptable. And so we actually get to learn through the platforms and through the updates of the platforms what the larger assessment community is thinking about and talking about regarding different issues. So for example, you'll see in front of you, this is what the requirements are for any given measure within the planning and self-study system. It has a title, it has a target, and it has a description. It's actually quite simple. The task stream AMS, which was a predecessor, there are multiple predecessors that contributed to the building of planning and self-study, but as one of them, task stream AMS required a description, an acceptable target, an aspirational target, a timeline, a person in charge, all of these different things that kind of clouded up the process of getting good data. Because if someone didn't know one thing, they'd say, oh, well, I'm probably just not going to enter anything. Instead of something as simple as, what do you call this thing? What do you hope to get? And give me an explanation or a description of what tool you're using or what method you're using to collect this. And so we'll see that there is a simplification that's in this platform that is actually the platform teaching us about how what is valued in a measurement is changing over time. That the things that may be valuable before aren't necessarily valuable now. And there's only one more screenshot if you'll bear with me. And this is the area where you can actually add results. And this is also an improvement on some of the other platforms that I've used and even TaskStream AMS that I've used as part of Watermark. But now planning and self-study allows you to add findings by just uploading a file, a PDF or a CSV or an Excel, where you can actually put the assessment results in there instead of trying to break it down yourself. Or you can enter the counts of students and who met the mark and who didn't meet the mark. And then finally, you can actually align it with your LMS, whether that's Blackboard or Canvas, and pull rubric scores from different assignments to populate the work that you're doing and showcase this. So one of the things that this is teaching us is that data matters, and actually providing accurate data matters. What I often received when I first started in the world of assessment is, as people were filling out their results, they would simply say, we did it. That's it. That's all I got. We did it. Which sometimes, for those of you who work with this and are trying to get faculty to engage in this, or as faculty are engaging in this, sometimes the bandwidth of faculty, especially at the end of a semester, just writing those 3 words, we did it, actually took a lot of effort. And so I have to be thankful for those who have put in that effort. But it also teaches us that we should value actual results, and we should value granular results, and we should value student level results that we can actually talk about. Not only did you meet it, but by how much did you meet it? What was the N of the student artifacts that were collected? What kind of information can we gain from this so that we can move forward and make improvements upon this? Because if your goal is a 70, if you met a 71, or if you got a 99, that really has an effect on how you're going to respond to that in improving things. So what do we do with all this? What I'm hoping that we're doing with all this right now, at least, is that we are reflecting on what our current platforms are telling us about our assessment, but we're also reflecting on what we know is true about our assessment measures and our process at our own institution. I often go to assessment conferences, and one of the most frustrating things is assessment conferences is when someone steps up and says, well, we did this at my institution and all of the faculty, like we did a process and we had 100% compliance. All faculty were highly involved. They each wrote a thank you note saying that assessment is the best. And I just don't see why anyone else can't do it this way. And then I have to remind them that they're like a Christian liberal arts university somewhere in the middle of the mountains that has exactly 14 faculty members. And so it's really easy to make that happen. Whereas at a school with 3,000 faculty members that are all competing for different things, maybe it's a little bit more difficult. And so understanding context is incredibly important. And I'm not dissing the mountain schools with 14 faculty members. That sounds like a dream to work at. If anybody knows an opening, let me know. But I think it's also important to start a conversation amongst the professionals and institutions like ours and amongst faculty members and administrators who do the work that we do to think about what are we being taught or told, and how does that differ from what we know is true or what we should go forward with. And the great news is that it doesn't have to end with, well, our platform says this, but we think it should be this. I guess there's no room to move forward. That's just the way it is. These platforms are incredibly responsive to input from, at least in my experience, these platforms are incredibly responsive to input from users. And so when I ask for things, it always becomes a feature request or something that's being worked on, or they give me a timeline of when that's being done, or they give me a reason why they're choosing not to do that. And that reason in itself is also them teaching me what they value as part of assessment. And sometimes that challenges what I think, and we get to have a rich conversation about it. And sometimes I think I'm right and I think they're wrong, but I'm not in charge of Watermark, so that's the way it is. But those conversations are so incredibly important to have and to grow from as assessment professionals, but also to be able to connect to why are we doing this and why are we engaging our faculty in these platforms? Why are we spending the money on these platforms and doing the training on these platforms if we don't believe what the platforms are teaching? And that's why I think if you don't have a platform, then it's important to think about these things when you're choosing one. If you do have a platform, it's important to investigate the current platform that you're on and see how responsive they are to what your assessment needs are. Because the last thing that we need to do is try to shoehorn what we think is best for our university into a platform. The platform should be dynamic enough that it can accommodate the individual needs of the institution. And if it doesn't, it may be time to find a different platform. And then finally, I would suggest that more people partner with these systems and the companies that support them and run them, because we can't just sit in our little dark assessment closets grumbling and mumbling about this platform isn't doing this and we're angry about it. Instead, we can reach out to them and share, these are our needs. They aren't being met. Do you have a solution for that? Or is there an update that you can make in the current solution that we're using that can accommodate that? And more often than not, I've been surprised that the answer is actually yes. It just requires people to ask for it. And that also, of course, can come as part of a collective of professionals or faculty members who are asking for these things together. Now, as I said earlier, there's our little questions. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for two reasons. One, the PowerPoint is done, but also my computer seems like it's going to overheat and explode. So if I just shut off, that's what happened. But I do want to open it up to those of you who have stuck in this long to have what I hope is a conversation about how this plays out in your world and with the platforms that you use, and get some feedback from you. And that can be you jumping on and using your audio and visual, or it can be you typing something in the message. But we open up the conversation, and thank you for listening thus far.
Hi, are you Glenn or are you Paul?
I'm Glenn.
Hi, Glenn. Sorry,
Hello.
I didn't remember. I am very interested in this. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, when you pull data from Blackboard, you said that you pull the rubric score, but is it only the overall score, or can we get a score for rows? Can we get, individual element scores?
That is an incredible question. So the way that it works right now is it is pulling just the final score, and it is not pulling individual rows. I have reached out to Watermark specifically, and this is something, it's a feature request. So it's something that they're working on. The way that we work with Blackboard is slightly different than the way that Watermark can work with Canvas. And so I can't answer for all LMS systems. I only work with Blackboard here at Howard. And that has been a frustration, because what I don't want is for faculty to spend an incredible amount of time creating a rubric that's all beautiful and there's like 9 different dimensions. And then at the end of the day, it just says the student got an 84. Because
that's exactly the problem, because our rubrics, each element on the rubric is aligned to a specific standard. So the overall score, to be very honest with you, is worthless.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree.
Garrett, are you working for Watermark? Because I'm just thinking, like, that would be a game changer for me.
Yeah.
That would get me to use this software, is if I could pull the data directly from Blackboard. Because what we're doing right now is, well, maybe it's not so good for you. We're using TK20, but what we do is we replicate the exact same assignment that we have in Blackboard. We replicate it in TK20, and our students have to do it in both places. So it's a clunky system at best. My second question is, how do you go from this to your self-study report?
I want to respond to an earlier comment really quickly, and then I want to answer your question if that's allowed.
Sure.
The first thing that I would say is, one of the things that I do like is that if you can export your data from TK20 in planning and self-study, you can actually set up a measure, and then you can put the information in just as an export. You can export that information in and just fill out how many students met, how many students exceeded, how many students did not meet, things like that. And so you can actually export data and put it in. Obviously, I'm sitting here very far away from the people who are exporting that data and putting it in. So it's really easy for me to say that, as simple as it is for people to say, oh, just let IRA do that at Howard, and it's literally me and one other person. And we're like, I understand we can do it, but it doesn't mean we can do it.
Right.
So that would be one comment. The second thing that I would say to how do we use this in our self-studies, I'm assuming you're talking about our accreditation self-studies. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. People love using the word self-study to use.
I'm sorry. I meant specifically accreditation.
No, we're on the same page. So planning and self-study actually does have a tool where you can pull data from your assessment plans into the self-study. So it can actually show up as evidence. So what I'm going to do right now, because we do have a little bit of time, and I think that it would be beneficial, is I'm actually going to share my screen, and I'm going to pull up planning and self-study and just show you really quickly, if that's all right.
Sure, that would be great.
So I'm going to go to my applications, and golly gee, I think this is right. Perfect. Great. So this is what planning and self-study looks like when you log on to it. And you'll see there's this kind of home page where you'll tag in and see all the different projects that you're doing and things like that. Planning and self-study actually has a built-in accreditation self-study module. And so if you click into that, I'm actually going to create a self-study for you. And I'm going to call it NJACTE, which is my very favorite conference abbreviation that I've ever been a part of. And then they have some built-in ones. Now, they only do the big ones, right? ABET, CSB, but they do have, they should have CAPE. So for example, we'll just use the CAPE initial program self-study.
Okay.
And then you can create this. And the standard is actually built into the system. So you'll see all the standards are here. And then you can manage evidence by adding different evidence from different things, or you'll see right here, and I know this is small, you can see you can add planning reports. So if we had, and we just adopted this, so we don't have all of our data in here yet, but if you add planning reports, then you can add program assessment plans as evidence into the plan. And then what I love about this, I'm going to cancel that out. I'm just going to add evidence. I'm going to add from my computer. I'm going to find some random data point to add, if my computer will allow me. So yes, I'm going to just pull this CSV file and add it on there. So now I have this on there, and I can actually share it with standards. So I'm going to share it with the introduction and standard 1. And you can see this is like the 3rd time that I've been in here, but it's pretty easy. This isn't rocket science to figure it out. And then I'm going to say I'm done with this. And now when I go to standard 1, what's really nice is when I write my narrative, it will actually, forgive my typing, it'll actually allow me to insert a link into that.
Okay.
So I can actually link the evidence that I put in there over there. So you can add old reports as evidence, and then you can link them into the narrative. And then when you're done with this, you can print it out as a PDF, or you can create a static web page that can be sent so that all the hyperlinks work. So that's an example of how it can be used, how you can take it directly from the assessment reports into the actual system for an accreditation report. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to see.
Yep, that's it.
I have a few more questions, but I'll shut up if anybody else has questions they want to ask.
Well, I always encourage, if anyone has questions, they're also welcome to type those in the chat. And we have room for 5 more on the adventure plane right now. So you're welcome to click that button and show
here are my other questions. Can you import data from PeopleSoft?
Wow, you're asking good. This is not your first go around, Muriel. Right now, they do not have an ability to upload from those kind of systems. So you can't upload things from PeopleSoft or Banner or things like that. They usually go through another avenue. Now, for certain platforms like planning and self-study, you can import data sets that are in an Excel or CSV file that has been pulled from these different things, which is kind of common practice, but it doesn't link to Banner in that way yet. And I'm going to say it doesn't do that purposely for a couple reasons. At Howard, we're transitioning from Banner to Workday. So that was a really important question for us. Down the road, they're hoping to be able to do that, especially with some of their platforms like Digital Measures, which is a faculty credentialing measure. So it can pull directly faculty information from HR and things like that. But what it does is we link directly to, we can link to the LMS, which pulls from Banner. So we use Evaluation Kit, which is their course evaluation software, and it pulls all that information out of Blackboard, which is pulling from Banner. Some institutions have misgivings about linking an external platform.
Yeah, I understand.
To Banner. And so I don't know that
there's a security issue.
Exactly. I don't know if it's high on their priority list to find those connections, but I know I've asked those questions, and it's certainly something that they're thinking about.
Here's another question. Does this update in real time so multiple users could be using it at the same time?
Absolutely. So throughout it, you can assign what users are there, and anyone who wants to edit can edit that has that permission to edit. And then as data is added in. Now, once data is added as evidence, if those reports change, I don't know how that updates. So if it captures it as a static report and then it's evidence, or if I created this whole thing and then I changed that report, if it would change it in the system or not. That's something we haven't explored yet. And again, we just adopted planning and self-study in January. And so we're still, kicking the tires outside.
Yeah, right.
I do want to reach out to Jill. We're glad that you're here, and we're glad that you're a newbie. And it's actually exciting to me that you're here because one of the challenges that I see is that people without a ton of experience in assessment just inherit their platform. And if they're doing something different, they think they're doing something wrong, when in reality, that might not be the case. You may be doing something right. That platform isn't built for the kind of work that you want to do. And so I would encourage you to think about what assessment practices are best in your world for your faculty and your students and your culture. And then if you're looking for a platform, to identify a platform that helps you share that in a meaningful way.
We use TK20 primarily to grab all of our assessment data. And I'm not even the one who does the assessment. I'm just on the peripheral. So I see the kind of headache with trying to get a homegrown system going. And it's a lot. So
it's a lot.
Yeah. But
it's a lot. I'll say this, and thank you, Paul, for sharing that once evidence is updated in planning and self-study, it updates everywhere that evidence is being used. So thank you for that. I will say this, sometimes you can find a pretty good platform and it's good for you, and it's an absolute terror for your faculty members. And again, when Watermark and I started talking about doing this session, I said, the danger of letting me speak is that I will rarely lie to people. And they said, that's fine. Whatever you want to say is fine by us. So I inherited TaskStream AMS, and it was an incredible challenge. And it was an incredible challenge to our faculty members. And so getting my assessments done were more important than having my faculty engage with TaskStream. And TaskStream turned out to be the roadblock. And so I created Word templates and sent them to my faculty. My faculty would fill out the template, email it to me, and then I would by hand put everything into TaskStream for them. It was an absolute, it worked. We did this for 2 cycles. We're finally at a place now where we're engaging, and thankfully we have planning and self-study because it's the kind of tool that can actually engage faculty members, and it's not as scary as some of the other ones. And there's not a check-in, check-out, 3rd level of purgatory where you'll never get out of. So there is a way that we can engage in a more meaningful way with faculty. But sometimes assessment professionals do have to figure out ways to work around the limitations of technology or the capacity of their faculty, and that's just the reality. But I've played in homegrown systems before, and the benefit of having a platform is that it's going to keep all of your data and it'll push that data through multiple cycles, and it's so easy to have that. But sometimes institutions just have to do that, and I've worked primarily at larger institutions, and so it's not feasible to do that for 250 programs. But
Glenn, how do your faculty interact with this?
So we are right now, as I said before, historically our faculty, all they see is this Word document that they fill out in October. And then I put it all in and I send them the plan. Once it's in the system, I send them a PDF and I say, here's your plan. I'll come back to you in May. I'll check in with you usually around March to make sure that you haven't left for a deserted island somewhere, or that at least someone knows that assessment still exists. And then in May, I'll ask for those results. I just got off the phone with my assistant director earlier this morning, and on Monday, we're going to be emailing out to faculty, inviting them to log on. And luckily, planning and self-study has single sign-on capabilities, and so they don't have to figure stuff out. It's literally just push the button and they're in, which is a dream come true. So they can log on, and then I want them to look at what they have and start engaging with it, so that in a month, when we start asking for those results, they'll be able to do it. The faculty that have been a part of this so far, that have been piloting this, it's easy for them. But unfortunately, it's a little misleading, right? Because when you ask faculty to volunteer, the faculty members who are going to volunteer are the people who are going to kind of like technology anyway. And so my concern is the faculty members who can't add an attachment to an email. That's my concern. I know.
So here's my question. Here's the problem, a couple of problems that I have to solve. Right now, believe it or not, we're using Google Drive for all of our work.
God bless you.
And it works. We've got everything hyperlinked. It works, but it's not sustainable. So, but the problem I'm trying to solve, which I hadn't even thought about using it for this. So we do an annual data retreat where our assessment coordinator, I'm the accreditation coordinator, I'm not the assessment coordinator. Our assessment coordinator extracts the data mostly from TK20, but a few other things too. Like we have data from the state, and then puts it into a data packet that we literally, actually I think she might put that on a Google Doc. It's either on a Google Doc or we email the PDFs. Mm-hmm. If that were put into this program, the faculty members could log on and we could tag for them to see these particular files, or no?
So what you're talking about is more what I would call really SharePoint capabilities, where basically you're giving people permission to see different things. So we're in a similar situation. We have data packages is the exact word that we use. And our IR puts together, these are your graduation numbers, these are your retention numbers, these are the average GPA of your students, all of that. And then they send those packages. There's a SharePoint that faculty log on, and then they're able to go find their program and pull their program's data. Obviously, that's password protected, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, actually, we just started using Teams. I haven't played with it yet. I mean, literally like a month ago, we started using Teams.
Okay.
So that might be a better solution for that.
If you do have SharePoint access, I'm happy to also connect you with our IR person at Howard, and they can talk to you about how they set it up in that way and how they set it up with ETS. Now, I will say this. One of the feature requests that I've made to Planning and Self-Study, specifically around the program review, and we're still in here right now. I'm actually going to, don't save. I'm going to show you this really briefly. There is something called the program review module, and this is, I'm going to get the name right. Program review module. And this is one of the newer modules in the Planning and Self-Study system. But it actually is built out as a program review with the kind of things that you would expect. So I'm going to go to School of Education. And you're going to see that it already has the mission and introduction and all of these different things under it. Student learning outcomes, what are they? How do you measure them? Faculty qualifications, really all of those things that you're going to need going through accreditation or that you would want to keep up in an annual way. What I have asked them to be able to do is to upload data, very specific data that populates everyone's reports. So right now I can upload evidence to this. I could take all of those files, all of those data packages, and put them in here and link them in different ways. But what I want to do is be able to take one that actually takes those data points and distributes them where I want them to do. Now, there are ways that you could set up macros or set up programming if you've got someone who's doing crazy work with Python, that they could go in and automate that system of data entry. But I'm not that guy. I don't know how to do that. So someone was like, yeah, you could do that. I was like, yeah, I could. I could also go to the barbershop, but there's really no need for it. So I think that there's a way in which there are improvements that can be made. And this is why wherever you are in your path, whether you know what you need and you're just trying to find the right solution, or you're new to the idea of it and you're trying to determine if a solution is even the kind of thing you're interested in, I always advocate for people to stand up for what they need and what they believe for their programs to try to get that. And if a platform says we can't do that, or we're not willing to do it, or we're not interested, then maybe that's not the right platform to you. And at the same time, being very comfortable following up. I've had lots of calls with Watermark where they said, yeah, we'll really consider that. And then I'll follow up and I'll say, I need a more operational definition of the word consider. Does that mean like someone wrote it down somewhere? Or does that mean that someone is actually thinking about how this would work in coding? And come back to me. Tell me it's not going to work. That's fine. We're not going to break up over this.
Right, but you need to know.
I need to know what I need to do going forward. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I will, if this is any measure of comfort as you move into the weekend, I will say your needs are shared with other institutions. You are not alone in these needs. And that's encouraging because platforms will eventually listen to the needs of the many. Especially as reports become more data heavy, and we're not just talking about whether or not people met measures, but we want to add that information in there about larger student outcomes like graduation and retention, 4-year, 6-year, all of that.
Yeah. Employment data.
Absolutely. Service, work credit for, I mean, there's so much that we want to put in there that it's nice that one of the things I do like about this annual report, and this is really built out to be a traditional program review for those programs that don't have, as I understand it, for those programs who don't have accreditation, this is really built out to be a formal program review where you would invite other people to come in. We don't use it that way. We use it every year. We have an annual report and everyone has to fill out a bunch of information about faculty productivity and how
we do the same thing.
And so we're adapting this for that use. And then at the dean's level, we use the self-study to build out another form where deans add these program reviews as evidence and then respond to them in aggregate about how is your whole college or school doing with retention. Well, let me look at these different programs and then I'll put it in. And it's not a perfect process, but this is what they were doing anyway. We're just
so this was also conceived of for regional accreditation.
So this right here is, and this is new, and I'll certainly allow Garrett to speak to this if he has any thoughts, but on this particular subject. But what I understand is that schools were asking for some kind of capacity to talk about program reviews for those units that did not have discipline level accreditation, and for those schools that wanted to do an annual cycle of review where they included this information. And that's why they kind of envisioned this new module that they've added in. And it's not as robust as the assessment or the accreditation module because it's not meant to be. You don't have to create a website for it or things like that. It really is a data collection storage or a data collection stage. And then what we're going to be doing is after we collect that data is then we can use that as evidence for the larger report that comes from the dean.
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see the need this fulfills because we've struggled with that. Like I said, we finally settled on Google Drive because we wanted to be able to. We were originally keeping our data in Blackboard. We had, we set up a course that was for our data for accreditation, but it doesn't update in real time. So without the updating in real time, it's worthless.
Yeah. And
so I can see this fulfilling a really important problem.
And at the end of the day, no one wins an award for using a specific program. You win an award for getting the job done, right? And so I like planning and self-study, and I like my experience that I've had with Watermark, and I will advocate it only if it meets the needs of the person or the professional or the colleague that I'm talking to, because some people, these things are not cheap, and some people don't have the resources to do it. I work at Howard, which is a historically Black college or a college university, but a lot of my colleagues are at different HBCUs that don't have the same resources that Howard has. And so it's really easy for me to say, oh, just use planning and self-study. It's great. And they're like, yeah, well, instead we're going to pay our faculty members. So what are we supposed to do with that? And I do think that in the same way that you can, and I will just go on record as saying that Watermark has been really good in recognizing resource deficient institutions and partnering with them and finding solutions that work for their budget. And so it's not just like, oh, you don't want to pay this, get out of the house. I have found that, which is rare, they actually do care about these different offices being able to have the tools to do what they're supposed to be doing. So that just going on record as saying that. But I often talk to people and they say, we need a new platform. And I say, no, you don't need a new platform. You just need to make everyone use the one you have. Or, you know, like,
well,
can
yeah.
you do?
It took us a long time until we really used TK20 effectively. Yep. We owned it for years, and you know, there was a big fight and everybody hated it. And now we're finally to the point where we use it pretty effectively. Yep. But it took a long time.
That's the biggest advice that I give to people that adopt new platforms is if anyone can ask a question that you don't know. I used this example earlier that these platforms are like Swiss Army knives, right? And anyone who has a Swiss Army knife, 95% of people who own a Swiss Army knife have used one blade.
I know. That is so true. In fact, we have a New Jersey accreditation collaborative that we usually meet monthly or so. And a couple of the other institutions use TK20. And one of them in particular, I'm thinking she would sit there and she'd say, well, we do blah, 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 blah. And Liz and I would be like, what? Yeah. TK20 can do that? And we had no idea about the capabilities. I think we still don't. At some point, we need to have some kind of a conference with folks at Watermark to help us understand what TK20 really can do.
And even our School of Education uses VIA, and they also use TaskStream LAT. And we're having a conversation saying, oh, we're moving to planning and self-study. You can probably shift over and you don't have to use that anymore. And they were just like, no. You don't understand. Literally everything we do, like tracking students that are applying, faculty credentialing, like everything is in there because they've used this for so long that they've built out all these capacities. And so for those people who are using platforms that work for them, I always encourage stay with the same platform if it is working for you. If it's not working for you, stop beating your head against a wall and try to have a conversation about what platform would work for you that's within your financial and HR capacity to be able to, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to have people that know how to use this, right? And we have to have time to train people and time to work with people. And some people don't have that. And it's easier just to say, everybody just give me your reports. Auburn University, incredible assessment, NILOA, EIA designation, all these wonderful things. They use, I believe, digital measures. They don't use an assessment platform. Everyone just puts together a packet and sends it to people. And then they have like, whatever, 90 willing faculty members at any given time that want to read these things. So I don't know what they're putting in the Kool-Aid, but I'm happy to steal the recipe. So
is this, this is a question for the Watermark people. Is this priced for at a level that an institution would subscribe to this, or is it priced so that an individual college could subscribe to this?
And Garrett, I think you're muted if you're talking.
Okay. That's what I assumed, but so it would probably, if I wanted this, I would really need to get my regional accreditation people on board.
I'm going to speak a little bit until Garrett's able to jump on. I know he was having some technical difficulties earlier, but we approached, and there are usually, as Paul said, it is institution-wide, but there are ways that people can accommodate that. So there are, for example, a great example is our School of Education uses LAT. Nobody else does. And so they're not against selling it to just one college or school. A lot of
Oh, no, it's a matter of funding. It's a matter of funding levels, because I'm more likely to get my university to fund it if it's being used university-wide, of course.
And it's often based on FTE. So if it's...
Well, that's what I was going to, the pricing, I'm assuming, is per user, or is it by the size of the institution?
It's by the size, and Paul, please correct me if I'm wrong. And there are lots of people who would just be dying to talk to you about this, Muriel, I know, but it is, as I suspected, student FTE. So if you're only talking, at Howard, we were moving to this as an institution, but people weren't jumping on the way that we wanted to. And so we were just going to have to do it with the School of Business as a pilot for a year and then make the institution buy it later on. Luckily, we were able to switch over. But I think Garrett's on now. He might be able to speak to that more.
Yes, no, that's exactly it. I will say we have done college level before in the past if there's a specific need just for the college. But traditionally, what we've seen so far has been at the institutional level.
Got it. And you're right. I should look at the School of Business, School of Nursing. All of them need that for credit. Yeah. Okay. I get it. I get the political route. Thank you, guys. This has been very helpful. It's very interesting.
Thanks for all of you who attended.